Chemo Gandil. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
So, for our audience, Chemo is a 2L at Harvard Law School. And besides being busy with law school and all the time needed to prepare for classes, you've also decided in your 1L, which is even more impressive, to start your own company.
Yes.
Let's dive right in. Firstly, tell us about your company.
So the point of the company is to provide legal research at one of the most affordable rates, the most convenient, and to make it AI first. We invert the traditional question, which is about legal truth, right? If you go do a keyword search or a rule search or anything on Lexis or Westlaw, you'll come up with a series of cases. We invert that question by asking what the legal preference is. So we'll look at your jurisdiction, we'll look at your specific judge, and we'll tell you which case is most likely to react to which rule.
And to our audience, who might be familiar with, I believe, do not call, or what is it?
Do not pay.
Do not pay, and
Yes.
their AI, and you're using AI functionality to help make this more efficient, more productive.
Right.
Do not pay, and these other AI startups that are dealing with the legal stuff is more dealing with consumers and directly with like the people that lawyers service previously, and they're trying to disrupt it there. You're actually doing a very fundamental lawyer to lawyer thing, which for our audience, I believe, is LexisNexis and Westlaw are the two big players in this, where every law firm, every lawyer, every law school has to pay quite expensively for searching up relevant legal documentation.
Correct. Yes.
And so you're going to this space to disrupt essentially a duopoly.
Yes.
So that is very impressive to tackle. But yeah, let's dive into it specifically. What has been kind of for Fortuna Insights, the pathway from your 1L?
Sure. So when I originally started all of this, we weren't involved in LLMs. Actually, back in the day when I was at the University of California, Irvine, we worked on a machine learning algorithm using NLP to predict for Supreme Court cases. And what we were able to show is we were significantly more accurate than human experts. So human experts are anywhere between 65 to 70% accurate, depending on what studies you read. And we were able to show we were 91% accurate. And so back then, I was a big open source guy. I still really am. And we published that paper, all the data and codes online. And then we took that similar idea and then applied it to LLMs. So you're able to generate something using a RAG function. We have our own proprietary database. We've actually built out our own rules section. So if you look at Lexis or Westlaw, they have specific head notes for every case. We've built our own using LLMs, and then we can RAG that and create our own efficient outcomes. And then we can match those with NLP machine learning algorithms and actually tell you your odds of winning. So we can generate for you 20, 30 arguments, all with sub-arguments and cases, and tell you the chance of each one of those prevailing in a specific court. So the idea behind this was inverting the expectation. With Lexis or Westlaw, it's about, reading a case, seeing if it matches up. You're essentially reading 5 or 6 cases just to see a single rule. We basically tell you, which case is most likely to be dispositive for that actor. So we save you all the time on the front end there. Really, the reason I, even outside my research interests and everything like that, I thought 1L writing was the worst. It didn't make much sense, right? I learned the IRAC, CRUPAC format. It basically, the normal practitioners use this system called IRAC, which is issue, rule, application, conclusion. Harvard uses this thing called CRUPAC, which is like conclusion, rule, application, conclusion. It repeats the conclusion over and over.
The way you write typically materials for your class.
Yes. So specifically 1L writing. Most people don't know this actually, but most law classes don't have a lot of writing, especially the black letter classes. It's just a ton of reading. I mean, you're reading thousands of pages potentially just in your first L. So a lot of this deals with how do we understand the legal information efficiently. So instead of doing all the citing and the researching and wasting of your time, you can just focus on what the most important substantive material is and get down to what's important, which is analogizing.
That's very interesting. And so do you view your tool, Fortuna Insights, as a function potentially not only for actual practical transactional work, but also in the academic setting as well?
Yes, yes. Actually, when we initially came out with it, it was designed for students, not
Mm,
for legal practitioners. It's evolved into that, obviously paying customers. We can get into the B2B model, but we actually have a consumer application too, because we are a B Corp and
mhm,
we have this very strong mission, which is access to justice. And the problem
yeah.
is, in the ancient time, Roman era, they would publish all of the rules in the form and it'd literally be engraved on stone. And
Mm,
now people literally can't access the law. They can't access the cases. They can't access the statutes. Maybe
yeah.
do Google search, right? But it doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense to you. It's written in legalese. It's hundreds of pages. Some of these cases, the Dobbs case, for example, is
Mhm,
I got the equivalent even on ChatGPT to 128,000 tokens.
mhm.
So you're looking at like dollars just to put it in a context window, right? So the
Got it.
problem is understanding these cases has never been more inaccessible. So our goal is to bridge that gap.
Mhm. Well, let's dive into the intricacies, right? Because you have, in on one hand, these existing companies, which we'll get into, but on the AI space, there is, of course, the juggernaut of OpenAI and ChatGPT. You started this last year, and I believe, earlier, late 2023, there were a lot of jokes going around when they introduced the custom bot feature, where you're able to specifically program a GPT. That a
Mhm.
lot of the AI startups around the world where they got funding from VCs are essentially chat GPT wrappers.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is kind of for yourself, how do you differentiate, or what is unique about Fortuna that is like, not just a wrapper per se, right? What is the
absolutely.
specific case for the
Right,
functionality?
right. So it has to do with legal data. Really, at the end of the day, Lexis, Westlaw, Fortuna, we are legal data providers. And it's the way we take these really long cases, tons of data, make sense of it so that the
Yep.
program can use it. So essentially, we process legal data, we
Yep.
turn these things called rules out, and then we can match the rules between different cases, which in Lexis language allows you to shepherdize. That's what in law we call
Interesting.
comparing cases and determining which case is still binding. And you can do different things with that, right? You can compare similar rules in cases. Maybe the cases are contradicting. Maybe they're not. You can differentiate the cases. Whatever side you are in a case, you're going to want to make one of those arguments because there's likely some case out there supporting your proposition. So,
Right.
really, at the end of the day, what we do is we extract rules, legal principles from cases,
Hmm.
compare them to other cases, and then, unlike Lexis or Westlaw, we give you the factual differences between those cases. So we don't only generate a legal memo for you, we actually have a due diligence option. You can click it and you can look at the case, query a bot that will give you
Hmm.
the exact facts down to like if you're in a car crash case, what the color of the car was,
Hmm.
assuming the court actually reported that. And what you're able to do with those facts then is distinguish between cases and
Hmm.
more effectively shepherdize.
It
And,
seems.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and this is another thing with the custom GBTs. I want to talk about this. I was really excited about them. So we tried to release some, and they would do multiple cases. We tried to make a Scalia bot. We made a Thomas Aquinas bot. The problem is the thing can't handle more than like 25 pages. Originally, it was like 50. It's gotten worse over time. So
Interesting.
the problem is,
For
and
you to input data
sure.
into
So the
it.
knowledge base, right?
Mhm.
Now, of course, you could connect it to an API and then you could run it yourself. But the problem is you'd be losing money on those custom GPTs then, right? A solution isn't any good if you can't monetize it. So the problem with the custom GPTs is they're just not at where they need to be. Now, I would love to be able to use them, monetize them in some efficient way, and just sell our legal data through OpenAI. That'd actually be the ideal
You're going to
situation.
where the customers are, right?
Exactly. But unfortunately, it's just not there yet.
Understood. Well, dive into the specifics, more specifically dealing with this audience that you have. So you mentioned you're a B2B. You're going to work with law firms. You're going to work with law schools. You're going to work potentially with consumers on a consumer application as well. What's been kind of for the journey itself, right? From idea to execution, what has it been for you? What does your team look like? How did you start bringing this
Sure.
together?
So my co-founders and I have been friends for 20 something years. There's literally one of my co-founders, Kenny McLaren. There's literally pictures of us in kindergarten together. So we've been friends for a long time. Same with Jameson. And so they do a lot of the technical side. Kenny is actually a master's in computer science. Jameson is a software engineer. And so when we're working through this, I do a lot. I also help with the product development, but I now do a lot of the sales, kind of the direction, a lot of the CEO working. People don't realize the administrative work. They do a lot of the technical product development. So that's kind of how the team came together, right?
Yeah.
And we actually originally conceptualized this as another paper from SCOTUS AI. So we were going to take that same open source paper and apply it to all the district courts. But we quickly realized you need money to do that, because if you're going to use Azure to deploy a bunch of machine learning algorithms, it's not cheap.
Definitely.
So the startup world was kind of just an efficient way to rationalize our research interests. And that's kind of how this partially came about.
Absolutely. So, I mean, from the business school end of things, right?
Yes.
You're starting a new venture. You're doing it with friends that you've known a long time. What's been kind of like, the dynamic for you? Like, how did you determine, and this is maybe for many other co-founders,
Yes.
whether it's in AI, whether it's in legal stuff, or
Sure.
whether it's just a startup in general, how do you go about deciding who's going to specialize, who's going to be the CEO?
Yes.
Who,
the governing aspect.
The governing
corporate
aspect, right?
Corporate governance is underestimated greatly. And the problem is people think corporate governance should be handled like actual government. So they make these super democratic startups, right? But the problem is democracy is noisy. Now, maybe you want that, right? If the government's going around and arresting people and shooting them, that's a problem. But startups don't do that, right? So
absolutely not.
What you want to specialize in the startup is stability, because you need to focus on product development and selling. If you aren't doing those two things, and really the latter, your startup is going to fail. So I've seen so many startups where they have a board and everyone has their equal vote and they split up the shares equally. And then they have multiple CEOs, right?
We've seen there are many that do like co-CEOs.
Disaster, absolute disaster. Now maybe it incidentally works.
Some works, some doesn't.
It is a recipe for disaster. We're more of a benign dictatorship, and I say that most literally because we all understand where the company's headed. But somebody has to make decisions at some point, and sometimes people won't agree on those decisions. So I am in charge. I'm the CEO. I make the final decisions. I get great feedback from Kenny and Jameson.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there has to be a single person to make those decisions. Now, we do have a board, and really the check on your benign dictatorship is the board of directors. So Kenny and Jameson also have seats on the board. And we have equal splits of shares. So I do believe in that because we're all in this together ultimately. But when it comes to the officers specifically, there has to be one person making those decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely, something that I've seen to long-term success, but you're also going to have to, clearly you guys have actually hashed this out and made that clear conscious decision. Many startups, they don't. They avoid the question. They avoid the governance aspect. They're like, let's build this product. And then then they reach that stage and it gets messy.
It would be pretty ironic for a legal startup to get involved in governance disputes. So no, we handled that all when we first started the company. I just said, hey, look, if you're on board, I'm in charge. And if you're not, then you don't have to join. And that has to kind of be the frame of mind. If you want at least to make stability one of your top priorities.
Absolutely.
And instability can kill startups.
Absolutely. For yourself, you mentioned the board aspect. Another key aspect of governance, and we see in the news Elon Musk's, others, with their private companies not yet public, they don't have a board, or the board is stacked in various ways. Right now, is it the board of just you three? Or do you have like independent directors?
Yes. No, we don't do any of the independent directors. This gets into my VC philosophy too. Generally, I like to keep VCs at an arm's distance. Look, our pitch to them is we're going to make you money. Here's our traction. Here's our different metrics. If you want influence and power in the organization, you can get it through shares during the annual shareholder election. But I don't want constant governance disputes. Because at the end of the day, if I give tons of board seats out, and this is time and time again, this was even in Netflix had a book on this, right? They had disputes in their board of directors about this. And the problem is, if you fight for all those seats and you have all these governance disputes, you're going to obstruct the purpose of the company. This is OpenAI classically, right? This is the board of directors is moving a different way from their officers. And if you have that, then you have essentially this mini polity that is against itself, right? And it can't survive. Somebody has to win.
Absolutely. Um, Tell us a little bit about, obviously you mentioned, right, this is takes a lot of processing power to build. You have a lot of data,
Mhm.
right? And so as important of the governance of a startup, as important as the product is, of course, the financial aspect of it, the profit, the losses,
Mhm.
scaling the company up. How has it been, and in classic VC terms, right? People do friends and family around, they'll raise some initial capital or they put their own capital, right? And bootstrap it. And then
Mhm.
eventually, if they scale sufficiently, they'll do a bigger seed round or an angel investor before series A, B, C, so on. Where are you at currently, and what's kind of been that process of maintaining a business that is hopefully profitable or at least not loss inducing to a significant degree?
Right, right. So we've raised 310 in pre-seed, and that has some family and friends, that has some VC, some from our venture studio. So we've kind of done all of that at a 7 million valuation. And our goal is, thank
Congratulations.
you, and our goal is to raise seed at a 20 million valuation for 2 million. So that's kind of where we're aiming at for all this. We've been very fiscally conservative when it comes to raising. We've gotten a lot of deals in the millions. It's just they want like 30% of the company. And that's just not viable. Now, I understand this is a bad economy right now for VCs, the high interest rates. Why would you ever invest in a VC if you could put it in a bond, right, and get your 5-6% back?
Right.
But that just means we should be building the product and waiting. Now, we need enough money to do that, right?
Yeah.
Cost us about $70,000 to build out our product, purchase the correct hardware. I'm not going to give out too many of the secrets, but I'm not a big cloud compute guy. I think it's great for scaling. I think it's terrible for building out product.
Mm.
Because if you're trying to run inference, you're going to make a lot of mistakes there. So when it comes down to it, for us, our philosophy with raising capital has been, do we need it to survive? Now, for me, that means two things. That means, am I going to get kicked out of my house? Like the company helps us, for example, pay rent because they're not paying me a salary. Am I going to be able to eat? And our system's going to crash. So those are really the only basic questions we're asking
Yeah.
when it comes to capital.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great thing to dive into because there are many startups that, we've seen
Yes.
rise, fly high, perhaps too close to the sun, and then fall, especially because they don't necessarily have fiscal constraints. They
Yes.
don't monitor very closely. So it seems certainly you have a very disciplined approach towards
Yes.
maintaining your runway.
Absolutely. So we have about a year and a quarter of runway. That is what I'm told, absurdly long for a startup at this stage, especially because we have 2 employees on staff. So we are
In addition to your
actually we have 3.
all
Yeah, we
right.
just hired another sales rep, one of my good friends out of Arizona. So and we pay them by commission in part too. But
Of course.
we do that. A couple of reasons is we expect full time. This part time mentality for founders, it doesn't work. I remember back, so we didn't start on this full time till August,
Okay.
and we did about as much work between August to September as we did between January to June.
Wow.
And it's just because when you're part time, your energy is diverted elsewhere. You're working a job, you come home, you're more tired, so you're not thinking about how to implement a system.
Yep.
Maybe you're not implementing the best system. And a lot of it is about planning. So we deploy systems pretty fast now. A lot of our features come out pretty quickly. And then, of course, we have to test them. And we're able to do that much more efficiently being full time.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a critical aspect that startups don't really figure out, especially, if you're not making money right away, are you going to commit to it full time? But it seems
Exactly.
you 3
You have to take
have
the risk.
dived in. Yeah.
Even when you're making, so we are making money now. We have decent revenue. We're approaching about halfway towards our goal of 100K ARR, which is obviously about a little less than 10K MRR. So we're moving towards it, right? But that's not sustainable with and of itself. That's not going to bring you to profit. The point is to show on that bootstrapped budget you can get there.
Right.
And then those VCs are going to have a lot more trust in you because you're going to be able to show, what your cost per click is, how much it costs to convert a client.
Absolutely.
We have a funnel, so part of the reason we use this.
Let's dive in. Let's dive into the funnel a little bit.
Yeah. So VCs hate when I talk about consumers. They hate it. I've had several VCs just like literally walk out, and I've had one person say we were a disappointment because we did this. But the funnel works. So what we do, people don't realize how difficult it is to sell to lawyers. Now we do some cold calling, right? But the problem with cold calling is you get the secretary. Yep. They kind of just want to talk about the law generically. They're not looking for a new product. The best way to get to lawyers is to penetrate from the bottom. And the reason is because law firms don't really act like empires, right? When you look at a corporation, you have the top guy, you have these top managers, these major decision makers you can get to. But law firms act more like feudal states, where you have a bunch of different lords, right, with their different interests, partners, and they're all trying to kind of rent seek from the associates, right? Because that's the earning per
model.
Yeah, exactly. And so a problem with that is it's very hard to sell to an entire firm unless you have a critical threshold of lawyers already using it. So we introduce the lawyers to our concept of an AI-first legal app. That means, you're not getting this really complicated interface. You're having, first and foremost, a chatbot that leads you around to different sections of the site. So you don't need to go click on the different UI aspects. You just ask the bot and it gives you a link. And you can just do that for every single part of the app. We spent a lot of time on this because one of the big complaints with Lexis and Westlaw is we don't know how to navigate it. So how our funnel works is we get people introduced that way. Then we begin to hit them with the free trials, the enhanced features. People love, every time you generate, you get a probability model. If you're on the enterprise package, when we get a critical threshold of them, then we can work out a deal with their firm. Now, of course, this takes a long time because we have to learn what our lawyers unhappy with. We've had some critical, harsh feedback, which actually I think is the best feedback. The worst feedback, and they say it's great, and then they unsubscribe. That is the absolute worst thing you can get as a founder, because then you don't know how to improve and you've lost a customer. I think the second best is they tell you it sucks, why it sucks, and then they unsubscribe. And of course, the best feedback is it's great and they don't unsubscribe. So with the second one, we're able to actually iterate. The most successful startups are not afraid to deploy that MVP, get a few rejections, and then work towards making a better product. Iteration is kind of what defines it. This is the Darwinian aspect, right? It's not the strongest startups that survive. It's those who are able to evolve and adapt.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So as you mentioned, right, you're starting to sell this product now to law firms. What's been kind of the broader, I think what's always interesting is, right, law is a very ancient, very, very well established industry.
Sure.
Things don't change
very
easily, very fast. And here we have, generative AI coming in, disrupting many industries. And your startup is here to disrupt a critical aspect, at least within the American setting,
the
American marketplace, the legal precedent, the legal setting of how research, how arguments, how transactions are really done. What's been kind of the sentiment, the feedback, as you would say, from the lawyers, from the legal community, and perhaps even maybe from, if you've had feedback from like the professors and the academia sense as well?
The professors love it. They love this idea of, it's been a big puzzle in academia, right? And one of the big problems is access to justice. And, you discuss this in civil procedure in your 1L a lot. How do we make a more efficient system, right? And some people say we should hire more lawyers. Well, that's tough, right? The public defenders, they have a lot of turnover. Maybe you put more funds towards that way, but that also doesn't help you with all the civil cases, right? And then some other people say, well, maybe we have more administrative processes so they don't have to have as many lawyers. But of course, everybody knows if you have a lawyer in an administrative hearing, you're going to have an advantage. So really what it's about is making the law cheaper on its face as opposed to just trying to replace lawyers. Lawyers are always going to be needed to make those oral arguments, to edit the briefs. AI is not perfect. In fact, what we encourage people to do is take what we give them, edit it, and then re-upload it to see if their odds have changed. And so lawyers at the end are just playing this role as a broker, a provider of a service that by statute others can't give, right? Unauthorized practice of law is big. And of course, we only provide legal research, not legal advice. So when we talk about disruption, we more have talked about how the data is being shown. Again, all these fancy AI tech startups, I hear them on Twitter or Fox News or wherever. They're talking about how the world's going to change. You're going to have your AI lawyer. But really, the best AI law tech startups will be the data providers that give lawyers access to more accurate information quickly. That is really the pitch here. What is generative AI other than able to look through a system and discern better content for people to read and see and then eventually format into a brief? But it doesn't really solve any of the fundamental issues about the law, which involves lawyers interacting with clients, depositions. I know there's a lot of like relativities doing this e-discovery thing with Gen AI. There are aspects for disruption, but it's really just improving efficiency. And every time you have these major improvements in efficiency, invariably some people are going to feel threatened by that, especially if you're at the bottom. Now, there's kind of a second wave of skepticism at AI. I almost view this as more interesting. This is more the Luddite in every lawyer, right? They view it as threatening the human spirit, or in some way threatening one of the most oldest and prestigious and romantic. I've heard this a lot from lawyers who've said no to me a lot, which is the law has a romantic element behind it. And I think coming from everyone else outside of law, that's absolutely crazy. Nobody feels their lawyers are romantic. Nobody feels like going through all of that different paperwork is romantic. But the idea behind it is that law is oriented towards the common good somehow. And so law is the ultimate expression of how we make concessions in society and help everyone move towards some final good. And somehow, I don't know how, I don't really understand this branch and reasoning, AI is disrupting that. Now, my argument would be your critiques with AI, there's social media problems, control by algorithm, that's incidental. It's a tool. It's like when we had agriculture, right? Sure, agriculture might have led to a little bit more war during that time, but on net, it was good for humanity. Improvements in efficiency almost always lead to an increase in the quality of life. There's a different argument made about virtue and morality, and that's different. That's a problem with the health of the polity, not the tool itself.
Absolutely. I mean, that is a great way to think about, any sort of disruption. Are you improving ultimately efficiency, or are you trying to simply gain market share by not necessarily doing something radically different?
Right.
So for your, the established players in this case,
right?
LexisNexis,
you have Westlaw, you have
Westlaw,
Casetext. They acquired Casetext.
I see. And so just as when OpenAI came out, Google went into action, Microsoft went into action, of course, and Alphabet has built out, their own version because they do see it as a threat to their existing business model.
As they should.
And we've seen that certainly reflected in stocks
yes.
And in the news. How has Westlaw, how has LexisNexis kind of, in the last year thought about AI, if at all?
Yeah, well, they certainly have. So Lexis has Lexis AI and Westlaw has Westlaw AI. And without getting into some of the deep problems with those UIs, right, they're not AI first. To get to the Lexis AI, you have to literally navigate to it. Lexis, again, all of these major players still focus on their fundamentals, which is case search. If you log on to the homepage, it's case search. And, you can eventually get to the AI, but it's really just pointing you back towards their basic practice books, very basic facts on the cases. It's not doing the hard work, which in the Lexis language would be shepherdization, right? So it'll tell you, like, this case is mentioned by this case, and it had a negative association, or we believe it was overturned, but it won't tell you why the facts broke down in that way. So they're still focusing on those basic fundamentals. I do think they're focusing somewhat on AI, but they're not AI first. And the reason for that is because their method of data collection. So Lexis, Westlaw, when they create head notes, which again, head notes are just legal principles extrapolated from cases, they're still largely done by humans. So you have to have the committee of humans, they read through a case, they extract the quotes, they match it to the parenthetical. That's an incredibly time-consuming process. And so if you're incorporating AI just on the front end to just display the data rather than collecting the data, you're having this large, expensive back-end process with the cheaper front end, and then your margins are still going to be hurting, which is why it's very expensive to use some of these others. In fact, the majority of the firms we work with left Lexis or Westlaw because of the cost. It was just so high to incorporate their AI systems. Now, I think part of the reason is because they've spent a lot of money. They fine-tuned. I think fine-tuning is generally an error in this industry because the law is constantly changing. And various reasons. The Westlaw spent $650 million buying Casetext, right? So obviously, if you do that, you're going to have to turn a profit from that.
Absolutely.
And this is where startups can come and disrupt this duopoly that have had very little incentive to actually innovate.
Absolutely.
Spring allergies.
Absolutely. No worries at all. No worries at all. Diving into that piece, right? And more specifically, you've built out a company. It's, you've had evaluation. You've built an MVP, right?
Yes.
And it's further developing. Many startups go through this difficult choice when they've, and you're already valued at a 7-figure range, and you're aiming for an 8-figure range as well.
Yes.
Many startup founders have this difficult conversation of what's the end goal? Do I want to build my own company, or do I want to perhaps exit at a certain point? And I want for our audience to learn a little bit more about not just your startup, but you, of course, as one of its co-founders, its CEO, a student at Harvard Law. What's kind of your leadership philosophy? What is your kind of entrepreneurial philosophy towards this startup at the very least in the future?
Yeah. So everyone loves talking about exits. I always view exits like when I hear them at iLab or I hear them in different contexts, they're like fantasies. They really, I'm going to have $100 million and I'm going to buy a yacht and everything like that. That's the wrong goal in this industry. If you're here to get a yacht, go into finance or something, right? The problem is that talking about exit strategies appeals to investors, right? So we are incentivized to do it. Investors want to hear about their 10x gains. Investors are right with you in the fantasy, right? And sometimes even, employees, people, you want to inspire people in your company for these exits. But again, you're then orienting your startup towards the wrong goal because it's not going to be easy. And chances are you're going to fail. And most likely you're going to, even if you do get far, you might get acquired, but you're not getting the $100 million exit. So I like to focus on more of the fundamentals. What is benefiting our clients? My big win is when we score another firm. That's when we go out to dinner as the company, right? It's not when we, get another investor check. Even when we raise the $2 million this spring, I'm not going to view it as a celebration. I'm going to view it as a call to action. Now, when we start making serious revenue, we onboard these firms, we meet major production deadlines. That, in my opinion, is what I view as a victory. Now, if we're going to talk about the, end goal here, I really do view us in some ways as IPOing. We could be acquired. It's possible. It have to be at the right price, but more importantly, I don't want us to just become the next Casetext, and that just gets buried behind the Westlaw firewall, and then so much for your access to justice mission. I guess it was all for Nye, and well, not for you personally, but maybe for everyone else. So my problem with this system with acquiring is that it just maintains the duopoly. You will never change the world. If Netflix had sold to Blockbuster,
right,
they would never have changed the world, right? They wouldn't have even gotten that great of an exit. So I think it's selling yourself short if you actually believe in the company to exit that soon.
Absolutely. For yourself, what is it like to lead a startup, perhaps day to day, run a company day to day as somebody, in their early mid-20s?
Yeah.
What's been the experience like? And working with, you're hiring employees, they're older than you. And,
yes.
I think among the Harvard community, the, graduate students, undergrads, we're all insulated, right? We're in a bubble where everybody's told, everybody thinks they're very smart. We're destined to many perhaps do great things, and there isn't as much interaction with people outside of this bubble. And so for yourself, you're in the nitty and gritty. You have a company to manage in addition to all the classes. What has that been like?
Yeah, so just on a personal level, it's really quite simple. It's a wake up at 6 a.m., be at the office as soon as you can, and work till 9 p.m. And in between, you go to classes, you do work, but you have to focus on the company. It's a sacrifice. It really is. I met a lot of other startup founders out of Harvard Law, And the problem is they're not willing to make the sacrifice. You cannot work that big law 2L job. You cannot go into big law after you graduate and hope to work on it on your, off time. It's not going to turn out. So it requires sacrifice. I actually love people outside the Harvard bubble. When I do employee interviews, the number one question I ask is about work-life balance. It is the most toxic phrase I've ever heard because it's people who believe they should not have to work as much to get to that end goal. Yes, we want the best people. Absolutely, yes, we want the smartest, the most innovative, but we're not yet at the Netflix level where I can pay them those $300K salaries. So I want the people who are going to be in that office every single day, and they're going to grind. They're going to get the work out. They're going to produce, for their specific job. If you're marketing, there's going to be a lot of grunt work. There's going to be SEO generation. There's going to be social media postings. There's going to be content generation. It's not all just building the fancy analytics, predictions and forecast modeling. It's a lot of doing that actual work. For me, it's a lot of administration management, and increasingly so. When it was just Kenny and I was doing a lot more, sales. I was doing a lot more of the cold calling.
Mhm.
I was actually helping with product a lot. I can kind of program, so I use TensorFlow, and I'd help with some of the, initial machine learning models and seeing if we're mining data, or I'd actually help Mechanical Turk out a lot of the data. I don't do any of that anymore. I mostly talk to people, help with closings, work out deals, kind of direct the company. So I'll help with some of the product management. I'll say, look, these are the things we need to do. I'll say these are the media posts where we're doing badly. I'll look at a lot of the forecasts. But increasingly, I think even we don't have that many employees, but it's a lot of management between people. And then you just focus on what's most important, which if you're a CEO, you really fundamentally have one job: sell. So my entire job now is to close with firms, to help with marketing, and to sell.
Absolutely. That's an important lesson for any founder, certainly founders and CEOs.
Yes.
Well, let's dive into broadly, a little bit more about you, and I think the legal field itself. I think we can have a ton of legal conversations, of course.
Yes.
But let's dive into a little bit about, you graduated from Irvine in, I believe, 2021.
Yes.
And so you experienced the COVID era,
Mhm.
and part of that experience and your work led you to pursue a legal education and to build this legal startup.
Yes.
Tell us about, why the pursuit of law for yourself.
Oh boy, this is my law school question right here. In every interview when you apply for law school, they're going to ask you why law. Now, what you really want to say is, well, I think it's cool, it pays a lot, and it's just kind of the next logical step. You kind of invent a more romanticized version of that answer, right? These higher ideals. I think when it really comes down to it, it's the only practical way to understand modern institutions. That is really the reason why. I was a professional registered parliamentarian before. So what I would do is I would help political committees or corporations interpret bylaws, right? That sounds really dry. But the reason why that's interesting is it's how an institution actually operates. And if you don't understand how the system actually works, you're not able to move that system towards a better ends. So for me, really the reason I think why law per se is I'm interested in how the system works. And if you don't know how it works, you can't change it. And that's really what my research showed me. So actually, my original paper on the United Nations I did, my thesis advisor was Dr. Sarah Saras, and we focused on these large international institutions. And I had two models. The first model used a machine learning algorithm and looked at regressions with rule frequencies. And what I mean by that is people making motions, people moving to amend different items. And I thought we can understand how the institution works just by that. And the second was with a more traditional NLP model. And the NLP model just blew the traditional structuralist model out of the water. And the reason is it's not only about the structure. Structuralism I view as kind of a intellectual taint now. And the reason is people think, and this is the problem with law that I've come to realize more and more, is that it's just about what the rule is. But the rule is not as predictive, at least if we care about a theory insofar that it describes reality,
right,
as the people and the healthy discourse behind it. If you don't have those fundamentals, the rules, they don't matter. The form is agnostic.
I see. Well, speaking of various forms and beliefs, you're a law student in Harvard Law.
Yes.
And now, and more broadly in the US, we have this legal battleground,
Oh
that
boy.
intersects with politics.
Yes.
What has been kind of your sentiment of the student experience, the student perceptions, the next generation of lawyers up and coming, on, for at least the American students and those who wish to practice in America? What's been kind of the sentiment of the intersection of politics, academia, the classroom experience, and of course, the real world?
Right. So this is my whole theory, right? It's if you don't have the fundamental discourse, the structures, the rules, they don't matter, right? And that's one of the problems with politics now is polarization has prevented healthy discourse. There is almost a psychological mental block between discussions of conflicting rules and the corresponding discourse with them. So it's very unfortunate in that way. Fortuna, of course, is not political. It's for everyone. But at the end of the day, the law is going to have a tilt. I've had investors come and say that we want us to de-bias our legal platform, right? We had one investor that was actually contingent on her signing the safe. And what I told her was, well, that defeats the purpose of our startup. Our startup is to describe the system. It's not to change the system, right? Fundamentally, it's to describe the system so you know how to engage in it. It's not going to help anyone if you de-bias a case, right? And then when they're actually being prosecuted for it, their lawyer's not able to make an efficient argument. Nobody cares. This is the big problem, right? I see this in VCs, I see this in legal practitioners. People care about the outcomes a lot more than they care about the political correctness behind your kind of opaque legal system, right? So really what we emphasize is giving our customers the best outcome. We don't promise anything more than that. Sometimes the law is offensive.
Yeah.
There are racial ideas behind the law. There's prejudices, there's inequalities, and that's just part of the law. Now people should go change that, but they should know what is unequal, and that should be reflected in their legal research.
Absolutely. You yourself, again, you're building the startup. I assume you're not doing a 2L law firm
No,
internship.
I'm not.
You're
Nope.
focusing full time on this endeavor.
Yep.
What has been, as we mentioned, AI is disrupting the industry, it's making it more efficient. What is the sentiment among the student body, perhaps your peers, about entrepreneurship versus kind of the more traditional big law path?
They all want to do big law. I mean, they'll give these high-minded, answers about they're going to support, equality and social justice and whatever. They'll go talk at all the firm dinners and everything. And I'm not anti-big law. I mean, they're some of our clients, right? And we want to give them. I mean, we're working with Big Law right now, a couple firms on actually helping them build out their own in-house system. So we have an API. The future of this is not having your own SaaS solution. It's actually having your own in-house solution so that you can control where your data is going. But that's kind of subsidiary to the point here, which is that entrepreneurship is not really alive at Harvard Law. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that you have enormous debts coming out of this. This is simply the reality, right? I'm going to have like $200K of debt coming out of this. So I'm really hoping we are able to raise so that we can pay me, right? But there's other reasons too. It's where if you go to OCS, right, the whole idea is interview for law firms, get the big law job, they'll pamper you over the summer, and then you can go work for the corporations, right? That's the whole idea. Yep. There's no incentive to pursue an entrepreneurial path. Now, I hope that changes. And I have seen a couple approach me and, they're interested in their startup idea. And I'm really big on them. I'm like, guys, you need to dive into this right now. You have to have a sense of urgency because if you don't, nobody will. And the problem in law school is, well, there's a million other things. There's a million other commitments. You're on a journal. You have your friends. You have your extracurriculars. Yeah. You want to go to the networking events. And so that sense of urgency gets diluted. So you have all these competing interests in law school. There's easy money here. You get $250K, nice starting salary, your friends, your extracurriculars. And that prevents you from moving towards this sense of urgency. So if I had to say the one reason why I don't see more entrepreneurship at Harvard Law, It's because a lot of them do not have a sense of urgency. And so they'll do startups, right? There are people doing startups, but they won't commit to them because, it's a side project, side thing.
Very interesting. As we dive into the future, there's a lot of worry that AI in society is going to have this big disrupting effect to jobs, various industries, people without necessarily skills to transition to another industry. What are your thoughts for the legal field? You said lawyers aren't going to be replaced.
Well, I'm talking about litigation in particular. Yeah, transactional, I think, is going to have the board kind of wiped a bit. Because think about it, a lot of the transactional work is this thing called redlining. I don't know if you've heard of it. Essentially, you have a contract and you're looking for language that insinuates a particular point, and then you redline it, right? You cross it off and you give a different recommendation. AI can do all of that, and it can do it way better than humans. In fact, there are so many cases about lawyers missing language, and AI would very rarely miss language. Now, you're afraid of using basic AI because of hallucinations and things like that. But if you're just amending contract language, you're not citing cases in your redlining, right? So AI can do a lot of that. And that's why we also don't want to be in the transactional industry, because the question you pose is, what are you providing? Well, if you're just providing a foundational model that can go into Word and make redlining, everyone's going to do that, right? We already see that. One of the biggest players out there right now, the prior VP of Azure on Harvey, right? What are they doing? They're just doing redlining. Really good redlining, be it. And then you have others like Spellbook, for example. What are they doing? They're doing redlining. The entire transactional industry is going to get wiped. There'll still be lawyers and there'll still be associates. You have to work with people. They're going to have to help you file documents, right? But the number of jobs you will need to complete those tasks will be minuscule. It'll be shrunk. And anyone who's saying anything different just does not understand the technology. Now, they'll say, well, the technology is not there yet, therefore our jobs are safe. Well, yeah, it's not there yet. But the fact it's almost there should be incredibly alarming. This is like the 1900s and they're getting the assembly line out, right? And they're saying, well, surely they can't build cars with that yet. And yeah, it's like a couple years out. So via transactional, I think it will. Litigation, it's just going to make them more efficient. Now, I do think it'll decrease the price of litigation over time, but it actually might decrease the median price and increase the average. Because now you're going to have big law firms that have bots that are going to be able to optimize for specific judges. So people will pay, especially major corporations, they'll pay millions to have a bot that gives them a 2% better prediction odd on like this multi-million-dollar class action suit, right? And so I think where this is heading towards, again, is away from legal truth. The natural law is like this inevitable truth, and towards legal preference. Because at the end of the day, that controls better for outcome. So again, the future I see for litigation is decreased medians, increased averages. And then again, for transactional, I think there's a couple other notes to make, which is that I think the line between transactional and litigation will wear away. And what I mean by that is, okay, well, if I can have the AI automate all the redlining, the big law firms are going to justify what they need to do to keep those jobs and those billables. So now you'll be able to do things like due diligence on the redlining. Like, will changing this word implicate me in this case? What would this judge think about it? Is this enforceable? Because the only reason you have lawyers review your contracts is because you think you're going to get screwed, right? Yes, they give these high-minded legal theories of explaining relationships, making expectations clear. But most of that's made clear in a boardroom, right? Most people aren't looking at the contracts and like, oh, this is how I need to go implement this. So a lot of it's going to have to do with enforceability of contracts, and that's a litigation problem, right? Because now you have to determine your chances of winning, what arguments are you going to make, in what cases. So I think that line will wear away as AI becomes more integrated.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's been a lot of interesting insights for our audience to think about, not only of your startup, but also, of course, of the broader legal industry and our audience, especially those in law school or in the legal field, find some value and insights from our conversation today.
I hope.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kimo, for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you.